My name is Ali, I'm a doctor and YouTuber.
I'm Taimur, I'm a data scientist and writer,
And you're listening to Not Overthinking.
the weekly podcast where we think about happiness, creativity, and the human condition. Hello, welcome back to Not Overthinking. How are you doing, Ali?
I'm doing great, thanks for asking. It's been a very odd week because I've actually worked for all 5 days this week.
5 days a week?
Five days a week. I don't know how people do this whole working 5 days a week thing. Because in previous weeks, I've had random days off and I've had one long day and then a day off the next day and stuff. But it's pretty hard going working 5 days a week.
Yeah, it really takes it out of you.
Yeah. Anyway, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, man. I've, work-wise this week was pretty standard, but I think a few interesting things happened that I'd like to mention. The first was that last night I saw Spider-Man Far From Home. It was so good. It was unbelievable, man. I'm a huge fan of the current iteration of the Spider-Man series, but this was way better than I thought it would be. And I was really looking forward to this. I think it was the best film I've ever seen.
Oh, amazing. Okay.
I'm a huge fan of Tom Holland. I think he's just so cool. He's got the kind of boyish good looks, full head of hair kind of thing.
Full head of hair.
And he's just really cool. And yeah, it was amazing.
Okay. What do you mean he's just really cool? What about Tom Holland is cool?
I think I have a bit of a thing for, people with sort of boyish good looks who just seem nice.
So he looks like a semi-good-looking white boy.
Yeah, but it's a certain type. So I think Shawn Mendes is similar, extremely attractive, nice body or whatever.
But
he's
boyish,
taller.
But in a boyish way. Whereas
not
someone
like rugged, not like Jason Momoa.
Thor or
yeah.
Okay.
So I'm quite into the sort of
so
Shawn
you prefer
Mendes.
the more nubile, as it were.
Sure. Tom Holland, amazing. So that was one thing.
Yeah.
The other thing was that in the past week or so, I've found myself exposed to various random niches. So I think last weekend, I don't know what made this happen, but I went down this rabbit hole on YouTube, obviously, where I started watching some magic videos. And you were into magic back in the day, so I've kind of been on the periphery of the magic community through that. And I was kind of re-exposed to the magic niche, and I was kind of reading about it and stuff. And it's just really cool to see sort of these niche worlds that people are living in that the outsiders aren't really aware of. And so magic was one of them. One thing I sort of got back into this week is aquascaping.
What the hell is aquascaping?
So I used to be really into fish keeping, and I'd like to get back into it. I really want to set up a fish tank in our flat now. And aquascaping is the art of arranging stuff in an aquarium nicely. And so there was this Japanese chap who basically turned it into a legit field. Okay, I can see you're not that interested. Anyway, and then the final niche I sort of was exposed to this week was that for the past 2 days, Lucas, my co-founder, and we went to a conference about spreadsheet risk. So there's a community of people in the world who do a lot of spreadsheet stuff, and they're so into it that they convene once a year and they write papers and they publish these papers and they give talks about how to minimize the risk of using spreadsheets in an organization. And so we went to this talk of the nichest Excel and spreadsheet people in the world, and it was pretty small. There were 4 tables in the whole conference. Maybe
4 tables? Oh, damn.
30 people or something.
Oh, wow. That's incredible.
Less than 30 people probably.
Basically a classroom.
Yeah, basically a classroom. And these people get together once a year. And there were people who've been going to this conference for 2 decades. This has been going on for ages. Anyway, super niche. And it's just really cool to be exposed to sort of an inside view into a world that you're actually an outsider to. And I was kind of thinking that this is so bizarre and so niche, but these people absolutely love it. And these are just normal people. These people have families and
Yeah, somehow.
But the point is that I feel like I've had this worldview for a while, which I'm trying to undo now. That it's weird to have sort of obscure niche interests, and people who have those there's weird people and there's normal people. And if I'm honest, I've always kind of felt weird, for various reasons to do with these kinds of niches. But everyone's got one, and I think it would just be really interesting to sort of explore more random niches that I'm an outsider to. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I can fully relate to this experience. One thing that I used to enjoy doing on YouTube is, with some games like World of Warcraft, for example, people would create a strategy guide based on how to fight a particular boss. And when you understand the game, you would understand all the niche strategy that goes into fighting this one boss and how to deal with mechanics based on your classes and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And that, from that, I started just kind of occasionally browsing strategy videos for other things like League of Legends that I've never played in my life.
Oh, nice.
And hearing the sort of strategy that goes on for something that I have absolutely no idea about.
Yeah.
And I just thought it's almost kind of interesting, seeing this whole world that, I just hadn't explored.
Yeah.
And always got me a bit like inspired to like do more cool things. But
Yeah, I think the lingo and the inside jokes are always funny. Someone at this Excel conference, someone would have mentioned like one way to do a particular calculation, and everyone would sort of laugh like, "Ha ha ha! CSC functions, am I right?"
It'd be like, what the hell is a CSC function?
Yeah.
Anyway, what's our actual topic of the podcast this week?
All right. So one thing I've been thinking about this week is maybe you'll like this one actually because it's to do with advice.
Oh yes, I love advice. All right, give it to me.
And it's I guess it's to do with how we should give advice and what our sort of duties are to the people around us when it comes to things like this, right? So let's take like your friends for example. I think like part of the duty. This is maybe a strong statement. I don't know how much I stand by this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Part of our duty to our friends is that we sort of want the best for them and we want to guide them towards living their best lives, and we'd hope that they'd guide us towards living our best lives as well, right? And so there's this thing that Mimi, our mum, and I always go back and forth on, where her approach is very much like sort of let people do what they want, if it works for them then great, and kind of very I think like hands off in terms of
very Reagan economics, laissez-faire.
Yeah,
I think that was racist. Who knows?
God, you sound smart right now. Yes.
Winning.
Yeah, so like my mom and I often go back and forth on this, where if she'll disagree with something that say her friend is doing, she wouldn't really like make it known or whatever. Whereas if I disagree with something that one of my friends is doing, I feel like, it's my sort of duty as a friend to let them know that, I think this thing is like bad for you or bad for other people, whatever. Like let them know that I think this is like a bad thing and let's like discuss it or whatever, so that sort of together you can reach a better place. And Mimi's stance was like, if it works for them, then great, quite hands off. And to be honest, I'm not sure whether she actually holds this view. I suspect she doesn't hold this view, but as a parent, it's probably the right stance to take to tell your kids to like
be more tolerant.
Yeah, to be tolerant. So like I think that might be what's going on there. But there was a situation this week where a friend asked me for advice about, I don't know, some like relationship thing or whatever, right?
Wait. So some like relationship thing or whatever. What do you mean?
The details don't matter. Just like, relationship advice,
Oh, okay.
People come to me for that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You can imagine why.
Since your year 8 days where you used to post on the student room in the health and relationships forum, and I think you had several hundred posts in there, because I remember when I stole your account to subtly advertise the BMAT business back in the day, like 5 years ago.
Yeah.
There was a lot of karma on your profile based on your health and relationships posting.
Mate, people loved it. I dished out the best love advice.
Oh, I think it would be cool actually to just kind of go back through your thing, just kind of do a search and then just do a podcast episode discussing your love advice that you used to dish out to people when you were like 13. That would be a great. All right, that's next week's podcast sorted. Anyway, yes.
Okay, so like, look,
people come to you for relationship advice.
And look, I think there's a bit of a dilemma when someone comes to you for advice, because I guess the thing I was thinking about in this case was, okay, does she want me to put myself in?
Oh, was it she? Yes. She came to you for relationship advice.
Yes.
Damn, this is suddenly got a lot more interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
What a week it's been. Talk to a girl.
Yes, love it.
All right. Anyhow, so she came to you for advice, and the dilemma was: do I put myself in her shoes and give the advice from her point of view, or do I sort of give the advice from my point of view? All right. Do you understand what that means?
I do, but you're gonna have to share a bit of the context.
I'll elaborate. Okay.
Yeah.
So like,
I must use fake names and stuff. No one cares.
So like, look, everyone has a different worldview, right? And I largely agree with my mum's sort of position of like, everyone's different. What works for them, and what works for you works for you. And so on the one hand, I can see the value in like giving advice from the point of view of the other person, because sometimes it is useful just to get an outsider.
Okay, wait. I understand all of this, but right now you're talking as if you fully understand the context of what you're talking about, but I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't think our listeners have any idea what you're talking about. Can you just give us the concrete context of this conversation so that we can hang your abstract theories on top of it, rather than being all abstract and only getting to the point later on half an hour down the line?
Okay, fine. You're right. All right. So
basically, I just want to find out the goss. I want you to tell me the goss. What is the goss?
So basically, girl likes boy.
Okay, that's unusual.
Age-old story. We all know how this one ends.
Do we?
Girl likes boy. Girl isn't sure whether
Boy likes her back.
likes her back.
Classic.
Girl is unsure what to do.
I was unsure whether she should make the first move.
Yeah, it's things like that, basically.
Okay.
Right? And now
So basically the summary of every other relationship advice question.
yeah.
I like
pretty much.
someone, I don't know if they like me back. I don't know what I should do about it.
Oh!
Have you just realized that this is the format that every single relationship question takes?
No, I've just realized this wasn't actually... I'm actually accidentally mixing two stories. Forget the relationship thing. This
Wait,
was...
two people came to you for advice.
No, same person.
You spoke to two girls.
No, just the one.
Right. I was going to say,
Sorry.
That'll be a wild week.
All right, yeah. Ignore the relationship stuff. This was general like life advice to do with sort of career / life priorities, things like that. So this person was like unsure of like whether they should take sort of one job over another, and they were interested in like they've recently graduated and they want to like travel around a bit and they wanted to like spend some time, a few months living somewhere else, a different country, and so they weren't sure whether to like start their career off sort of properly now or like travel or whatever. And so the question was like, she and I are very different people, and like the things I care about are not the same as the things she cares about and stuff.
Right? What do you mean? I mean, apart from the fact that she's female, like she's presumably not into going to a spreadsheet conference about spreadsheet risks.
Yeah, safe to say she was not at Hugh Sprig this year.
Okay, how does she feel about Tom Holland and Shawn Mendes?
She actually isn't into Tom Holland.
Okay, so you don't have a lot in common then.
Yeah. Yeah, so look, we're very different people. I think she just wants to spend the next few years like having fun or whatever, which, yeah, great. Anyhow, the question was like, do I sort of advise based on her sort of worldview, which is like, I want to spend the next few years sort of traveling around and having fun and stuff, and sort of think about my career later on. And I think that was roughly her worldview. Or do I give the advice based on my worldview, which
is what?
I don't know. I think priority-wise, I'm probably more career-focused than...
What sort of career would she have had?
Sorry?
What sort of career was she going down, for example?
I don't know. Let's just say like law or something. I mean, it doesn't really matter. But
No, it kind of does, because in that position, the advice that I would, for example, want to be tempted to give is, travel around the world, build up a personal brand, start a personal blog every week. You document the cool stuff you're doing around the world, hopefully trying to make a bit of money on the side. And then at the end of it, if you want to, you can get a job. Worst case scenario, best case scenario, you make money off your brand.
Look, I think
that sort of thing.
The details of this case don't actually matter, but I'm glad you brought that up, because your entire worldview is that, everyone should strive for financial independence. The best way to do that is to like learn how to code, start a blog, start YouTube videos, all this kind of stuff.
This is like the advice I was giving to some dude who came over to my house for about 4 hours yesterday.
Yeah, okay.
Literally 100% focused on this this genre of life advice.
Yeah, so this is your whole shtick.
This is my whole spiel, yeah.
This is your whole spiel, and this is like your worldview. And a lot of the time when you're sort of giving advice to people, you're trying to bring them around to your worldview.
Yeah, I'm trying to convince them that this is the right way forward.
Yes, exactly. And so that's one way to give advice, which is to like try and bring the other person's worldview closer to yours. The other way to give advice is to step into the other person's worldview and sort of give an outsider's view from within that. Because like sometimes it is helpful just to hear someone else sort of say something to you that you're kind of aware of already or whatever, right? Like sometimes it's helpful for someone to just sort of say, look, I know what's going on here. You need to do this. And so the question is like, when, I think you agree that it's our duty to kind of...
it is a moral imperative on us to help our friends be better people.
Yes. Part of being in a community of any sort is for everyone to sort of help each other and sort of, try and help everyone live their best lives, whatever that might be.
Okay.
And so the question is, I suppose, like, when should that be trying to actually change their worldview to whatever you think is a better worldview? And when should that be sort of accepting their worldview and working within that framework? Do you have any thoughts on this?
I do, but given the framing of the question, I think this is one of those things that is very context dependent.
I guess so, yeah.
And so it's difficult to speak in abstract terms about what are likely to be concrete life decisions.
So if someone comes to you for advice, when would you sort of give advice from their own point of view versus go on your spiel about how they should start a blog?
So usually it depends on whether I think they would be receptive to my spiel and whether it's actually good advice for them. If I think so, for example, this guy that I met up with yesterday, he's already taken the first few steps. He started his own podcast. He took the effort of emailing me and then actively coming to Cambridge to have a chat with me. So he was kind of a fresh mind to have this kind of advice kind of hammered into him that this is what he should be doing with his life. And he really, really appreciated that. If, however, someone like Molly, my housemate, were to come to me for advice, me doing a whole spiel about personal branding wouldn't quite have as much of an effect as, you know, a 21-year-old engineering student from America who's already into the tech industry. You know, they're two very different worldviews. But then, even then, having said that, when Molly does come to me for advice about careers and stuff, my advice does tend to skew towards the start a personal brand. She's got her own Instagram account where she posts pictures of food. I'm trying to encourage her to post more pictures of herself to try and play up the fact that she's a doctor to make it more brandable. And now she's like started getting free stuff. And I'm not saying that's anything to do with me, but I think it's the fact that she's started to put more effort into this personal brand means all this good stuff is happening. So even in that circumstance, and my housemate Molly is the sort of person who is almost completely the opposite of anything you and I would care about. She would definitely not be going to this Excel risk spreadsheet conference, for example.
Yeah.
She would not care at all about being entrepreneurial, setting up her own business. Her raison d'etre is to raise a good family and to provide value to the world by being a good doctor. You know, pretty much the opposite of what you and I want to do, in a way.
I don't know, man. I want to provide value to the world.
Yeah, but come on.
I get you.
It's a different sort of realm. So Molly's often the person that I think about in my head when I'm thinking, does this advice apply to everyone or does it only apply to people who are like you and me?
Right.
But even then, I think we do have a duty to our friends to kind of bring them around to our worldview. And what I would hope is that this is something that there's a blogger called Mr. Money Mustache says.
Here we go. Here we go.
Right. So Mr. Money Mustache, as you know, and as some of my friends know, is one of my favorite bloggers of all time. Everyone should check him out. He's got an incredible blog about personal finance and like how to become financially independent so that you're not reliant on your own job to make you money. You can just kind of build up investments and live off that for the rest of your life if you really want to. Anyway, his spiel is kind of extremist in that he would say stuff like, you know, there's no point owning a car. You should just cycle everywhere. And if you can't get to it by bike, you can rent a car for the weekend. And there's no, like, you know, anytime you can walk somewhere, you should walk rather than take a car. So his whole online persona is kind of an extreme version of the thing that he actually believes. But what he says is that the reason he preaches the extreme version of the thing he believes is that when people apply the extreme version and apply it to their own life, naturally they're just going to take what's relevant to them, and that will mesh with their own worldview, and that will create a good amount of advice. And I lean quite heavily this way. I think it's useful, kind of like what Gary Vaynerchuk does. He's big in the name of personal branding. He says that everyone should be putting out 100 pieces of content every day on every social platform. Clearly, no one is putting out 100 pieces of content a day on every social platform. But people who listen to Gary Vee appreciate that is kind of an ideal sage-like status to aspire to. And therefore, it encourages all of us to put out more. And that's his objective. His objective is not the 100. His objective is just more than what we're currently doing. So I think in that case, I would have a strong bias towards trying to bring them around to my worldview, fully recognizing that these are intelligent people we're talking to, that we're giving advice to, and that they're actually just going to take what works for them. I don't know if that answered your question at all.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think it's funny how, well, according to you, in 2019, being a sage means putting out 100 pieces of content online every day.
It's all about content.
Every day we stray further from God. No, I think that's interesting. I think that the interesting thing is the thing you said about whether you think they'd be receptive to coming around to your worldview. And I think I fully agree with you here. There's like, I think that comes down to like,
it's all about empathy, as Gary Vee would say.
Yeah, it's all about empathy. And it's like, I don't know. I feel like with some people, I mean, what would make you feel like someone is more receptive to your worldview versus others?
So actually, this is something that I've changed recently. So previously, I used to, when asked for advice, I used to hammer down my worldview and ram it down people's throats.
Right.
Now what I do is that I take a step back and ask, okay, what do you want? What are you optimizing for? What do you want? What are you aiming for? What does your ideal life look like? That sort of thing. And I take the time to actually figure out what they want to get out of life, and therefore what sort of genre of advice I should give.
Yeah.
And this is the sort of thing that they actually teach you to do as doctors, because a patient comes to you asking for advice, you know, which contraception option should I take? And there's pretty much 3 or 4 different options that are all kind of reasonable. And I've got my bias towards the implant, for example, because you can just implant it into your arm. You don't have to think about it. It works for 3 years. You can take it out whenever you want. It's all generally very, very good. But if a patient comes to me and says, hey, what contraception should I get? It would be bad of me to say, I recommend you get the implant, because what I should actually be doing is trying to figure out for her what her priorities are, what she wants out of contraception, what her, you know, whether she feels that she'd be happy taking a tablet or, you know, putting something in her vagina or having an implant in her arm, and all these different factors that I won't appreciate from my point of view because her worldview is different.
No. But no. So what you're doing in the doctor case is that you're stepping into her worldview in order to give her the best advice relative to her worldview.
I'm asking her to explain her worldview to me because I know that I can't really step into it.
Okay. Oh yeah, sure. But you're trying to step into it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
And I think that's a good thing to do, and that's what I have now started to do more often when giving regular advice as well.
But surely there are cases where, I mean, let's say someone has a worldview. I don't know if we're using worldview as a good term anymore, but like, let's say someone has a worldview that you feel is quite damaging to them in the long term and isn't going to serve them well in the long term.
Oh god, yeah. Then I would happily combat that worldview. For example, if someone in the contraception example were to tell me that I don't believe in contraception, I think it's totally pointless. And for example, their method of contraception is the pull-out method, and they don't believe anything else. It's my duty as a doctor. I have a moral imperative to tell her that, look, I don't think the pull-out method is a good method of contraception. It's not that effective, trust me. Speaking from experience of friends, and therefore I would strongly recommend we can at least consider some other options. Equally, to use a more classic example of advice that people actually come to me for, sometimes I find people who have the worldview that money will directly correlate with their happiness forever.
Yeah.
And at that point, I'm going to counter that point and explain that, look, money only contributes to happiness insofar as you hit that $50,000 a year threshold or whatever. So if their premises are flawed, in my opinion, I'm going to try my best to change those premises.
Right, but this is still coming down to the question of like, I mean, okay, when you say their premises are flawed, what you're really saying is
They're axioms, they're assumptions.
well, no. What you're really saying is they have a different worldview. That's what you're saying. If you think their premises are flawed, is that not what you're saying, or is something different?
Okay, there are two different. I think worldview is the wrong term to be using here. Let's go back to the contraception example. One quote worldview is I strongly believe in the pull-out method, and I believe it's the only method of contraception that's reasonable.
Are we just talking hypothetically here, or is this actually something that comes up a lot? Where patients are like,
this was our scenario in our 5th year obs and gynae OSCE, which is why I'm intimately familiar with all the details and all the pros and cons of all these different contraception methods.
Nice.
And we would be running role plays with one another to figure out, okay, if we get this patient in the OSCE, and let's say they happen to be a Jehovah's Witness or a Catholic and don't believe in contraception, how are we going to tackle that?
Okay.
So we kind of run these scenarios. Anyway, one sort of worldview is I don't believe in medication. I believe in the pull-out method. I think it's the only reasonable one.
Okay.
Okay, so that's worldview A. Worldview B is, to be honest, I can't really see myself taking a tablet every day because I know I'm the sort of person who might forget to take the tablet. And if contraception is reliant on me taking a tablet every day, I don't think that would work for me.
Okay.
So there's two very different things here. One of them is where I think their fundamental view is flawed, that they don't believe in medication. And the other one is kind of more personal to them, that, okay, that's reasonable. You've clearly thought about this. You've clearly made a conscious decision that a tablet wouldn't be the right option for you. And so the way I'd be approaching these is slightly different. And at the moment, we'd be using the word worldview to describe both of these contexts.
Yeah.
But they're actually two different things. One of them is a flawed premise, in my opinion, but maybe there's better terminology. And the other one is taking a reasonable premise, applying it to their situation, and getting to a logical conclusion based on that.
I think I have a good terminology.
Okay, what am I trying to say here?
What you're trying to say is that, well, in the case of the person who lives and dies by the pull-out method. This is such a silly example.
Yeah, just gonna stop laughing now. So for a person who lives and dies by the pull-out method, yes.
Yeah, for this person.
And this is why we rehearse these role plays, to get all the laughter out of the way first.
So for this person, if they say that they don't believe in medication or whatever, the reason that you think their premises are flawed, if that's what you're calling it, is because I think it's because what you're actually saying is that they don't actually have a consistent worldview. I'm sure if you like drill down and said, okay, do you agree that
water is good for you?
Yeah. If you started at a point like that, you could very easily get to a point where they would probably, they'd probably at some point say something along the lines of medication is good, and then you'd be like, oh wait, but I thought you said medication was bad.
Okay.
And then that shows like an inconsistency in the worldview.
Yep.
And so the reason you'd sort of want to intervene into their world, sort of like intervene with what they're saying their worldview is because it's actually inconsistent with other things they believe, and you kind of want to create this consistency.
Yes. Okay. And in the other example?
And in the other example, there's no inconsistency. They're like, here are the facts. It's hard for me to take a tablet every day because I forget. And like, there's nothing to disagree with there, right? There's no inconsistency. consistency at all, and so that's fine.
Or perhaps one view is logical and the other one is illogical.
Yeah,
from my perspective.
Yeah. I guess like the reason it's illogical is because it's inconsistent.
Oh, so actually on a semi-related tangent, this guy who I was giving lots of advice to yesterday, one of the things we were discussing was about why he should get a Kindle.
Okay.
Just to take the example back to Rums that you and I are both comfortable with. And he was saying that he likes reading physical books. And I was like, okay, right, here we go. Here we effing go.
I've been preparing months with it.
Yeah. Months, years, mate. 10 years. And I was like, right, I'm not going to convince you that you actually should get a Kindle. And what he said was the classic spiel. Well, I took a sabbatical from social media for 8 months because I felt I wasn't engaging with the world, blah, blah, blah. Right. And I feel that I'm more centered with the world when I'm not using electronic devices. And I was like, okay, have you got electric lights in your house? And he was like, yeah, I've got electric lights in my house. And I was like, okay, I mean, that's an electronic device. Do you feel like you're less centered in the world because you have electric lights in your house? And he was like, okay, fine. No, of course I don't. Of course I'm going to use my electric lights and that doesn't make a difference. And I was like, okay, so it's not really the fact that these are electronic devices that you take issue with. It's probably the fact that these devices like phones and iPads draw your attention away from things you care about by sending you notifications every minute of the day. And he was like, yeah, that's probably reasonable. And then I argued, okay, I'd argue a Kindle is closer to an electric light rather than compared to a phone because it's just a device that happens to have words on it. There's no notifications, there's no attention taking away from it. And so to refine his worldview, it was more that he objects to his attention being taken away from things rather than things being electronic in particular. Yeah. This is sort of like the contraception example where, if someone agrees with some sort of medication, it was an inconsistent worldview. Yeah. And that was a point where I was like, okay, I'm really going to drive this point home because I think he's wrong and I want to make him see the error of his ways.
Okay, that's a good example. I think it comes down to the consistency thing. One example that I was thinking of was that suppose you have a friend whose life motto is, I'm here for a good time, not a long time. And they want to, yeah, classic. They probably have a live, laugh, love poster on their wall.
iPhone wallpaper or something. Yeah.
And they want to sort of spend the next 10 years sort of doing lots of drugs, partying a lot.
And hashtag no regrets tattoo.
Yeah, hashtag no regrets tattoo. Yeah. And they sort of want to, just go crazy for the next 10 years and sort of burn out and deal with the consequences later. That would be an example where I would sort of disagree. That's not my worldview, for example. And if I had a friend who was heading down that path, I'd be inclined to try and change that worldview. And I think it's for the same reason that it's sort of inconsistent with if you sat them down and said, okay, what do you care about in life? I care about being happy and sort of, they probably don't plan on dying by the age of 30 or whatever. And so living this kind of lifestyle for the next 10 years is not going to serve them well for the rest of their life. And they'll probably agree with all these things. And then it will probably be clear that it's sort of the sort of party for 10 years thing is inconsistent with a lot of other things that they want, right?
Okay.
And so that's the reason why it's acceptable to try and shove your worldview on them in that case.
But I don't think in that case you're shoving your worldview because the key thing you said there was that you'd sit them down and you'd have the discussion about their priorities, what they want from life, etc., etc. It's not like you're saying, mate, you're wrong. I'm going to convince you why you're wrong. It's you're saying, okay, let me try and understand where you're coming from. And if at the end of that you realize that actually their view is entirely consistent and they just literally only want to live for the next 10 years and don't care about long-term happiness, then, okay, everything is consistent. Fair play to them. They do
That's
them.
a great strat.
That's all good.
Yeah.
So I suppose when giving advice, what we're trying to identify is the inconsistencies.
So does that mean actually you should never really shove your worldview down their throat? And it really is always about
they're figuring out what they want and
putting yourself in their shoes.
I mean, in medicine, we never shove worldviews. It's always just a balance of what their priorities are, what our priorities are, trying to come to a shared decision about what's in their best interests, taking into account their views and the family's views and everyone else's views. So that's probably a much kinder way to give advice. And actually, now that I think of it, I came in quite strong at the start when I was like, yeah, I love to shove my worldview down.
Yeah, because you did say that, but now I think we're just talking about worldview in
a slightly different way.
A lot of things
obviously, at the start, prior to shoving my worldview down someone's throat, I'm going to try and figure out what their priorities are, what they want from life, etc., such that if my worldview is compatible with that and consistent with that, then I will happily shove it down their throat to the point that they're comfortable talking about it.
Yeah.
I think we've come to a conclusion.
I think that was helpful to sort of break out. The other thing is that the other thing which is sort of related to this is part of the sort of duty to the various communities we're in. So what sort of everyone sort of should be helping each other live their best lives and so on. To what extent do you I think there's this culture nowadays that I feel like it's maybe too strong. This culture of always being supportive. So I think there's a bit of a
yes.
narrative going around that your duty as a friend, let's move away from friends and just talk about communities in general, because it really applies everywhere, right? Your duty to sort of your community, the people in your whatever community you're talking about, is to support them, sort of almost no matter what. And do you know what I mean? I can't articulate this well.
Yes, I know what you mean. I think I occasionally talk to Molly about this, where just kind of being interested in the difference in like interpersonal relationship dynamic between like her group of female friends and like our group of male friends.
Yeah.
Whereby kind of with our group of male friends, if someone is making a decision that we think is, wrong for them, people will pipe up and tell them that. And you kind of know that you can take it, and that it's just a given that this is how we talk about things, and everyone's candid like this. What she was saying is that for certain of her girl friendship groups, even though they're very close, they would be very careful never to pass judgment on a life choice that someone else is making. So let's say they think someone is with the wrong sort of guy, they would feel a moral imperative to kind of let them know that we don't like this guy, but they would try and do it in a very, very, very subtle and kind of delicate and sort of tiptoeing around the subject kind of way. Whereas I feel like at least when it comes to most of my friendship groups with guys, we would kind of be much more blunt and much more shoving down our worldview down someone's throats.
Is that just a different way of communicating, or is it a different thing entirely? Feels like it might just be a different way of communicating in this case.
Yeah, potentially. Just being more concerned about the other person's feelings rather than less.
Yeah, I suppose. But I do think there is something going around at the moment about, I feel like, you use the word judgment, and like, you wouldn't want to judge the other person's life decisions. And I feel like there is a bit of a narrative going around just in general that like you shouldn't judge, basically like don't judge people, which is great, fully on board broadly. Yes, you shouldn't judge people, but
yeah, I know what you mean.
surely like
if someone in your community is making a decision that you fundamentally disagree with and think is bad for them in the long run.
Yeah. This is not you being, taking the moral high ground and like judging them in that way. This is a different kind. I don't know even if judgment is the right word, but I feel like because of the whole don't judge people thing, which again, I think is broadly good. I feel like the norm is to, support, which again is broadly good. But
so we're trying to identify the fringe cases in which judging is okay and supporting is a bad idea. So for example, the example that comes to mind is whenever Mimi dishes out life advice, it tends to be quite old school in the sense that, stick to your path, stick to the status quo, work your way up.
Stick to the status quo is, I don't think that's accurate. I think she always does say, try and be the best. She tries to.
Oh, sure. No, I agree. Try and be the best, but in a very narrowly defined field. So for example, if you're within medicine, pick a surgical specialty and try and become a professor of that specialty.
Sure.
For example, it's very much based on her worldview, and very much good advice based on her worldview, because she has our best interests at heart. And for her, she feels like obviously as a parent, she has a moral imperative to give advice that she thinks is good. And if, for example, I were to say that, hey, I'm going to leave medicine and travel the world for 5 years making YouTube videos, that to her would seem completely ridiculous, and
that would seem insane.
And she would be fully justified in judging me harshly for this and being like, no, this is unacceptable, you have to be doing this, and trying to shove her worldview down my throat.
Yeah.
And I can't really blame her for it, even though I would completely disregard her advice.
Yeah.
And I think it's reasonable for her to give that advice.
Yeah, I agree.
But it's also then reasonable for me to be like, actually, respectfully, I disagree with that advice, and I'm going to do what I want anyway.
Yeah. I think both are reasonable. Like her, she has the best of intentions, and you know what you want, etc. But I think, looking at my life, I think I do have some friends who are a lot more on the supporting front, and I feel like if there was something I was deliberating over for like a few days or a few weeks or whatever, and I was like, all right, lads, I've come to a decision, I'm going to do this. I feel like most people would kind of just sort of enter supportive mode at that point and be like, that actually sounds really good, and they'll kind of tell you your reasons back to you to sort of support you in the decision you've just made. And I think few friends I think people would be wary of like pushing back too much against that, because they don't want to sort of be seen as, I don't know, judgmental again is not the right word, but
naysayers or unsupportive
stuff like that. And actually, I think there have definitely been a few moments in my life where someone taking the opposite view and being extremely unsupportive of what I was planning to do has actually been hugely valuable. And so, for example, when I was in my final year of university, I was applying for sort of jobs and stuff, and I was thinking about, okay, what do I want to do? And I've always been quite into design and things like that, and sort of making apps and websites. And I thought, okay, maybe I'll sort of apply for a job as like a front-end software engineer at some place. And I've also always been into kind of stats and that kind of thing. And one of my friends who has worked as a front-end sort of developer, he was actually very strongly against me trying to go down that path, and he sort of very much pushed me towards trying to become a data scientist, even though sort of that was significantly harder to do as a graduate and so on. And he kind of pushed me. Yeah, he kind of was very anti-supportive of what I thought I wanted to do, and I'm really glad he was so anti-supportive of that, because I think I definitely benefited a lot from going down the data science route. I think the reason I was reluctant to do it initially was just because it seemed harder, and him pushing back against me kind of got to the bottom of that, and that was really valuable. And so I feel like there's probably lots of missed opportunities where, for fear of seeming unsupportive or for fear of seeming judgmental or whatever, we don't push back enough on our friends.
Okay, I wonder if that's really what's going on here. So when you said that, I suspect, so this friend was uniquely placed to be anti-supportive of your, I want to be a front-end developer.
Yes, he was. He was extremely well placed.
Whereas the rest of your friends are probably not as well placed to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not saying that other friends were wrong to not invest this level of detail into my decision.
But then I don't think it's necessarily a case of other friends not being anti-supportive because they're worried about being anti-supportive.
Oh, okay.
It's more a case of, the default position is that, if you were to come out and say to a layperson, like, take a random person in college who doesn't know anything about tech at all, that, hey, I've thought about this and something about stats, something about front-end web development, and they're like, well, what does front-end web development even mean? Because you haven't defined it, and you haven't defined it in this podcast either. They'd probably be like, yeah, I mean, that sounds reasonable. It kind of makes sense from my understanding of all the lay terms. Yeah, Taimur, go for it. That sounds very good.
Yeah.
But if you're talking to someone who knows what they're talking about and understands the situation and recognizes that actually this is probably not right for you, they might then be anti-supportive.
Yeah, fine.
And so I agree with the general sentiment that there does seem to be this culture of, hey, everyone should be supportive. But I don't know to what extent that's just us stereotyping, when in reality there are probably these sort of reasons as to why people might be anti-supportive or supportive about certain decisions.
Do you have any example? I think maybe I just had a very niche example. Do you have any examples of like a time where almost you wish people were more anti-supportive? Why are we using the word anti-supportive? There's surely a word for this. What's a word? Like
against.
Against?
For and against.
Okay, there we go. Nailed it.
So one decision that I have to make in the near future is what I want to do with my sort of after my second year of being a foundation doctor.
Okay.
So at that point we have this very, very natural career break. And the thing that I've been saying to most people is that I'm going to take an F3 year, which basically means a gap year, a year out of medicine, where I'll be doing some medicine stuff, but I won't be within a quote job. Right. And I'll be using that time to travel the world, making YouTube videos and kind of vaguely dabbling in some medical things and making medical educational content.
Okay.
And that sounds very, very reasonable. Like, it sounds like the sort of thing, it makes sense. You've got this audience, you've got this YouTube thing, you might as well exploit it, blah, blah, blah. The job isn't going anywhere. You can always return to medicine whenever you feel like it.
Yeah.
Most people are very, quote, supportive for this plan. They're like, oh, this is a great idea. There have been a couple of people who have pushed back against this, saying that, okay, but why are you doing that in your F3 year? Why not, for example, go through medical training for another 2 years to the point where you have 2 more years of experience, which means that when you do decide to travel the world 5 years from now rather than 2 years from now, you'll actually be a lot better placed to provide value in any medical environment that you're in. Ooh. Because you'll be much more of a specialist. You'll know what you're talking about. You'll be able to provide rather than just, leech value off the healthcare systems that you're in.
Yeah.
But the only people that can feasibly give that sort of advice are the people who are so familiar with this industry that they understand that that's a good sort of advice to give.
Yeah.
And I've always appreciated having that, but I also appreciate that, for example, if I were to tell you would say, yeah, man, go for it. There's a thing on the internet. It's pretty good. You wouldn't be like, actually, you'd be able to provide more value as a medical, as a doctor when you're an SD3 rather than when you're a CT1. Yeah, you haven't got the background to explain that. So that's the example that comes immediately to mind where I wish people, where I appreciate it when people are more anti-supportive of what I want to do.
And do you think in general, the people with that level of context about this field, do you think those people would generally be rightfully anti-supportive, or do you think, do you fear they'll be pushed towards supporting because of the general culture?
Now that you say that, I do think they would be pushed to, I don't know. The sorts of people who have been anti-supportive. I can think of two people who have been anti-supportive of this particular view. They are both very kind of stereotypically male, very kind of logically thinking, very I'm happy to shove my opinion down your throat without caring about your emotions. Those sorts of people.
Yeah.
I can't imagine, our friend Lucio, for example, even though she were to be, she'd probably be very supportive, but I don't think it would be a fear of being anti-supportive. I think it's just a general kind of awareness of context, being like, yeah, if that's the sort of thing he wants to do, then sure, I'm going to support that because he's my friend and that's a good thing to do. Whereas, like, as we've said in previous podcast episodes, there are no right answers. Yeah. And therefore, erring on the side of supporting something that someone's already decided to do is actually a very reasonable thing to do.
Yeah, like I said, broadly, not judging people is great, supporting people is great, broadly.
Yeah.
Are there times in your life where you do disagree with what someone is doing for their own sake or whatever, but you are not anti-supportive because you feel like...
Yeah, if it's someone that I don't know very well.
Sure.
Or if it's someone who's not actively soliciting my advice.
Yeah.
Then I will...
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah. Sorry, that's a given. Yeah.
But no, otherwise... So we've got a friend who's about to get married.
Oh, yeah.
If I were to meet his wife and suddenly realize, oh, crap, I don't think this is the right person for him, I would probably still be supportive. But then there's the whole background running of that, they've been together 5 years. What do I know from one meeting about the relationship? He probably knows what he's talking about, all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
I can't imagine I would be, for someone that I know well or someone who's actively soliciting my advice, I would actively be supportive when I think it's the wrong decision.
I see.
And I can't imagine many people would be in that position.
Yeah, that's true.
So I think overall it is just a case of some people are going to be more in a position to disagree with your worldview, to disagree with your premises and stuff, if they are within that context. And if they're not, their default position as friends is to be supportive, which is a very reasonable thing and a good thing for friends overall to be.
Yeah, that sounds pretty good. Well, I found it helpful to at least like talk through this stuff properly. These have all been sort of things floating around in my head, and I feel like I'm a bit clearer on.
So, what advice did you give your one female friend about the career thing? Did you end up going down into her worldview, or did you end up shoving your own worldview of just become a data scientist, man, down her throat?
Well, in this case, I thought I was actually well placed to comment on part of her worldview, which was that she wanted to spend a few months living in a different country and traveling and stuff.
Okay, that seems quite reasonable.
Which seems quite reasonable, but from experience, having done that a couple of times, I think I tried to urge her to exercise a bit of caution in saying that it's kind of overrated and 3 months is a long time. I think that was the extent to my trying to alter her worldview.
Okay, so it's not someone that you're like really, really, really close to. Because if you were really, really, really close to them, you'd probably take a bit more of a hardline stance.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the reason I wasn't so hardline about it was partly, it was just because we are very different people. And so even given the fact that I think it's easy to romanticize living in a random place for 3 months, even given that fact, I still think like we're just different and maybe she'll have a better time than I would doing that.
Yeah, I mean, that's very reasonable. And also like some podcasts that I've recently been listening to is about, even if you do decide to go somewhere for 3 months, that's not an irreversible decision. Like if you realize after 2 weeks that you absolutely hate it, you could just always come back home.
Yeah,
there is very, very limited downside to this.
Yeah.
And so I would actually err on the side of just be like, yeah, go for it. See if you like it. If you don't like it, you can always come back.
Well, no. So the downside in this case was sort of the career cost of like, pushing sort of career stuff back.
But is that actually an actual career cost these days?
Sorry?
Is that actually a thing these days? That is there truly career cost to, for example, taking a gap year?
Yeah, look, I'm absolutely the kind of person that would encourage people to sort of ditch their careers and do things like this. But in this case, the details of this situation don't matter. In this case, I do think there was a legitimate career cost that would be worth taking. Blah blah blah. It doesn't actually matter what the details were of this case.
Okay.
But that was a good discussion. I think that was
we arrived at good ground, and I think I've this has made me realize that actively realize that whenever I am in the giving advice mode, I would definitely make sure to figure out what their worldview is. But then, having said that, I think when it comes to doing things like making videos, I think it is reasonable for someone making videos or writing a blog post or something to take a more hardline stance on this sort of stuff. So I think we talked about this in a previous podcast episode. Like when I give study tips and advice, like there is a given subtext that, okay, this is just techniques that work for me. Take what you want and ignore the rest. You don't have to watch this video if you don't want to. It's not that I am shoving this stuff down people's throats, because they always have the option to leave the video if they don't like it. And so I'm not going to spend 5 minutes hedging and saying that, look, ultimately you just have to sit down and figure figure out what you want from life, and then blah 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 blah. By the way, this is how you revise for your maths AS exam. I'm just going to tell them how to revise for the maths AS exam.
It would be extremely tiresome if everyone who was producing some kind of content for mass consumption had to caveat everything with, by the way, this is just my opinion, your mileage may vary, blah blah blah. It's a different kind of thing.
So actually, I think we talked in a previous episode about how to take advice.
Have we talked about that on the podcast?
Have we talked about the podcast?
It's something we talk about.
We have definitely. Perhaps it should be a topic for. No, we did. We got some criticism about one of our episodes, the one with Paul, about how it was a bit slower and it was the first time, and we were querying how best to actually act.
Oh yeah, we had a discussion about that. Yeah.
And I think ultimately that it's the duty of the person receiving the advice to filter it, as opposed to the duty of the person giving the advice to filter it, because the person giving the advice is going to offer what's best for them. Mimi giving advice about my career, she's just going to offer what's best for her. I can't hold it against her to be like, oh, well, actually, I think she should take my worldview and context into account.
Yeah.
It's my job to do the filtering. And
I think that's definitely true. Yeah, advice should never really be taken at face value.
Anyway, so should we wrap up? Any interesting insights of the week? You've been writing these down.
I haven't been. Well, the place I go for these things is my Twitter feed to see if I've tweeted anything remotely interesting in the past week. It's been a light week on Twitter.
Because you spoke to that one girl twice.
All right, insight of the week thing. This is something I think I have a tweet draft. I have a tweet sitting in my drafts.
Oh, here we go.
That I'm going to send out at some point. It's about goodbyes. I feel like goodbyes are a really profound thing. Maybe we should do a whole episode on goodbyes at one point. But basically, there was a scenario where recently I had like a half an hour meeting with someone. But the meeting was like really good. I feel like we're really connected. We really got on. And at the end of like a standard half an hour coffee or something, you just kind of say, cool, like good to see you. Maybe you shake hands, maybe you hug, depending on like how well you know the person and stuff. And you kind of go separate ways. But in this case, the half an hour was so good and like it felt so great that it seemed like it would almost be rude just to like shake hands and say goodbye. Yeah. Like it wouldn't do it justice. Yeah. So I feel like in general, like the goodbye ritual should be like proportional to sort of the depth of the connection or something like that. So like if you've just spent like a week with someone, at their house or something, and then you're going home, you don't just like say, see you later. It's a bit more of an elaborate goodbye ritual because it should like be fitting for the occasion.
Yeah.
And so I think generally the social protocols are fine, where like after an average half an hour meeting with someone, you shake hands, you say goodbye, it's fine. But like there are these cases where you sort of have these exceptional interactions where the standard goodbye protocols don't feel like they do it justice. And so I think I had one of these moments in the past week and I was like, what? That should be something I could do in this situation.
What's the standard protocol?
Like, what am I just say goodbye and then say like, this was really, really nice. I really like it, whatever, right? So yeah, I don't know. Goodbyes. I think goodbyes are weird. I have some thoughts around that. Do you have any thoughts on goodbyes?
A few, but we'll save that for another episode because we're a bit thin on the ground on podcast topics recently. So I think this would be a good one, and I think that's a good point on which to end the show. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed.
One last thing.
Okay, right.
I'm really sorry. I've been extremely bad with replying to podcast emails for the past few weeks. I'm really, really sorry. We have actually read all of the emails. It just takes especially with the longer ones, it's really, really nice to read these sort of long emails where you send us your thoughts. But it just takes longer to reply.
Okay, wait. So at the moment they're being forwarded to your email account, right?
Yeah, that's the thing. You should start taking some of these.
Yeah, why don't we just set up a shared Gmail account? Yeah. We both use Superhuman. We can add it as a second account and just kind of collectively reply to stuff.
But basically, thank you so much for the emails. We do actually really appreciate them. I do actually read every word of all of them, and it's really, really nice to read them. I'm just disorganized and it takes a while to reply. But thank you.
Yes. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you for emailing us in, everyone who's emailed us in. We really appreciate it, despite Taimur not replying. But we're going to make more of an effort to make that a shared activity from now on. As usual, if you enjoyed this podcast episode, please could you share it with a friend or like leave us a review on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you found the podcast. Oh God, I've still got this cough. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.